Hari Om. In this video, we are going to talk about what are Webform Events. In our previous video, we have discussed what is Internet technologies or what do you mean by web technology. What are the different technologies used for client-side programming and server-side programming. Then we have also discussed what is ASP.NET architecture. What are the different characteristics of ASP.NET? What do you mean by an client-server application that lives on a web server, which is known as a web application? We have seen two different types of web-based applications. One is called as web form, the other one is called as web service. We have also discussed what is a web form, what is the extension of web form that is used in ASP.NET, and we have seen a web form divides a user interface into two parts. One will be the visual part, what is your form design. The other one is the logic that lies behind it. Because of this, you call it as code separation. And then we stopped with what is the basic difference between web application and a website. Because using your Visual Studio, you will find two different options when you try to create a web project. It will ask you whether you want to create a web application or a website. So we should understand what is the basic difference between a web application and a website. Before we discuss what is the difference between web application and the website, we are going to talk about web forms in this video. Then we will continue with the difference between web application and a website. Now we are going to consider the Visual Studio and web forms. Your Visual Studio IDE provides the following tools. You can have visual designers, you have code-aware editors, you have integrated compilation and debugging, and project management facilities for creating and managing application files. These are the things that are provided by the Visual Studio IDE. Not only that, your Visual Studio supports web forms to quickly and easily create the user interface for ASP.NET web application. Now, when you see a web form in ASP.NET, the web form is composed of two different files. One will be the user interface form, the other one is code behind file. The user interface form will have the extension .aspx, whereas the code behind file will have the extension as .aspx.cs if you are using C# programming language, or if you are using Visual Basic, then it will have the extension .aspx.vb. All your web forms are similar to your Windows forms because they are also event driven. So let me just show you what are the two different files available for a web application. I just open my Visual Studio and you can see here I have created a web application. And the web application is now having two different files. One is webform1.aspx, which is your user interface. You call it as user interface. And this is the code behind this particular user interface. The code behind file, you call it as code behind file. So since the code is in a different file and the user interface is in a different file, we call it as code separation. And you can see here the extension for the user interface. The extension for the user interface is .aspx, whereas the extension for the code file is .aspx.cs. So that is what is specified here. Sorry. That is what is specified here. Web form is composed of two files. One will be the user interface form with this extension, and the code behind file will be having this particular extension. Now, since your web form is also event driven, you should understand how these events are managed in a web form. How these events are managed in a web form. So we are going to talk about web form events here. Event is nothing but, all of you know that when you click a button or when you select an item from a list box, then it is going to raise an event. Or when you type something in the text box, or when you select an option in your radio button, all these things can be called as an event. So all the web forms will be of event driven, and this event happens in the client machine's web browser, right? So when I open my web browser, you will have the form loaded in your web browser, and you type something in the user interface or you click something on the user interface, then the events are happening in the client machine. But since your ASP.NET program is available on the server, the event handlers are available in the server. For example, this is what you call as event handler. I have text boxes, I have a button. When I click this button, you call it as an event, and what is to be done when I click this button is known as event handler. So for this particular button click, you have the event handler. You have the event handler as button click. Now this event handler is available in aspx.cs file, which is stored in your server. It is stored in your web server. The form will be loaded in your browser, so it reaches your client machine. But when I click this button, it goes to the server for invoking this event handler. This particular point you have to remember. So what happens here? The events are triggered in the client machine's web browser, but they are handled in the web server, for which user interactions require a round trip. I call it as round trip. What do you mean by round trip? The browser sends a message to the server and the server responds with the event handler. So the browser will be sending a message to the server. What message it will be sending? It is going to send the message of what event happened, what are the arguments of that particular event, and the server will be receiving the event notification, and it will be receiving the information required for handling that particular event. So the server will be responding with the event handler by collecting all the event details from the browser. The browser is available in the client machine. So your ASP.NET offers only a limited set of events such as button click event and text change event. These are events that the user might expect to cause a significant change and for which it's reasonable to perform a round trip to the server. So the event happens in the client machine and the browser will be sending a message to the server. The server will be manipulating the message and it will be responding with the event handler to the client. This process is what you call as round trip. So to be more precise, in this diagram, I have this diagram depicts a aspx.visualbasic file. You can see here I have downloaded it from the internet. I have sample webform.aspx. This is the user interface. aspx.vb. If it is Visual Basic, the extension for the code behind file will be .vb. If it is C#, the code behind file will have .cs as its extension. So this is the VB code behind file. This is the ASPX interface. Now what happens? You are going to enter the hours, you enter the rate, and you want to calculate the pay. So when you click OK, this details will be reaching to the server, and the server will be calculating the pay, and it will be returning the same form with these details: hours, rate, and pay. So when I click here, the data of hours and rate will go to the server. Here it gets manipulated. Then it is going to recreate the sample web form with hours, rate, and the pay value, and this will be returned to the client. Again, another example for the round trip. In the browser, you will have an interface something like this. Number 1 and number 2 will be entered here. You will have an add button. When you click this add button, it will go to the server. There the two numbers will be added. Observe here, it is in .visual basic. Two numbers will be added. Then the server will be creating a new web form. It will be creating a new web form with the first value in the first text box, second value in the second text box, and the result in the third text box. And this new web form will be now loaded into the browser. So this form will be discarded by the browser, and this will be the new form that will be loaded in the browser. So you click the add button, it will be submitting the data to the server, and the server will be processing these data. Once it has processed, it is going to return a new page to the browser. So this page will be discarded and the new page will be loaded into the browser. So this process is what you call as round trip. Now, when this process is happening, you can observe here, you type some data here in the text box and you click a button called as add, etc. So these are some of the events that are happening. Now when you take these kinds of events, two events that we have taken in this example, one is a text box change event, the other one is button click event. Now you can observe here, when you take these events, the events in the web form can be called as a postback event, or it can be called as a non-postback event. So these are the two types of events that may happen in a web form. What are they? Postback event. The other one is non-postback event. Now, postback event is a term referring when a user action occurs that requires server processing. So event that cause the form to be posted back to the server immediately is called as a postback event. For example, the click type events such as button click event are known as postback events, because the button click event causes the form to be posted back to the server immediately for processing. The web server will process the request and it is going to generate a new HTML page and it is returned to the client browser. This sequence of events is referred to as round trip event. That is what happens here. When you click the button, it is immediately taken to the server and it gets processed in the server and it is generating a new web page. A new HTML page will be created. It generates a new HTML page and this HTML page is now returned to the client browser. So this entire sequence is what you call as round trip, and in this round trip the button click event is known as a postback event. Why? because the postback event causes the form to be posted back immediately to the server. So when you click this button, it is immediately taking you to this particular server. Whereas you have another kind of event called as non-postback event. Events where the form is not posted back to the server immediately is called as non-postback event. Or you can say events that are raised at the point which may be delayed for a considerable time. This is the point you have to note here. This particular event can be delayed for a considerable time. For example, if you have text box change event, this event can be delayed for a time. That is, here the button click event must be immediately posted to the server for processing, whereas if you have a text box change event that need not be posted immediately to the server, instead it can be delayed for a considerable time. And not only that, if you have this text box change event to be posted immediately, then you can force the controls with non-postback events to behave in a postback manner by setting their auto postback property to true. So if you have a text box and that text box change event should happen immediately, then what you can do, the property called as auto postback of the text box can be set to true, so that this non-postback event becomes a postback event. So I repeat, non-postback events are raised at the point at which ASP.NET discovers it needs to raise them, which may be some considerable time after the user performed the actions to which the events relate. For example, the text box web control has a text change event, and this change in state happens on the client side, and it's only when the user clicks a button to submit the form that ASP.NET discovers the changes. So this is when it will raise the text box change event for all the text boxes that changed. That is, multiple events during the handling of a single submission. So non-postback event, what it will do, all the non-postback event will be taken to the server only when a postback event is happening. Say for example, only when you click the submit button, ASP.NET will be discovering all the non-postback event. Only then all these multiple non-postback events will be handled. Just to understand more about this postback event and non-postback event, to make it more, to put it in a better manner, let us go to a demo program. Let me open a Visual Studio. I have already created a form. Let me have this enabled to false. Okay, and age also I am not going to type, so I change the enable to false so that I cannot type these two. What I am going to do in this form, I have a text box for entering the first name, entering the last name, and once I have entered the first name and last name, automatically the full name appears in this text box. Then I'm going to enter the year of birth, then it will show you what is the age, right? Now what I have done here, when I type the last name here, I want the text box change event to be handled. So I just double click on the text box. You will be taken to text box to text changed event. So whenever you change something in the text box 2, I want the text box 1 data and text box 2 data to be concatenated, and it must appear in text box 3. So if it is a desktop Windows application, what happens whenever I type something in the text box, automatically this statement will be processed. But since this is a web form, this text box change event will be delayed until you click the submit button. Now, whenever I enter year of birth here, I want the age to be calculated automatically. So what I have done, I have created the text box 4 text change event. In this event handler, I have subtracted the value that I entered in this text box from 2020 so that the age can be calculated and it will be stored in this particular text box. Again, observe here, this is a text box change event which can be delayed until you click the submit button. So it shows here only when I click this button. So only when I raise this button click event, these two events will be happening. I will show you. I will run this program. I run this program. It opens the web form. It opens the web form in a browser. So this is now the client machine. This is now the client machine or the client browser. So when I click the button here, it will take this data to the server program. Server program is now running here. This is the server program, right? So it will take it will take these data to the server. There it gets processed. Now I'm going to enter the name. So let me enter the name, first name. I enter the last name. And observe here, when you enter data in the text box 2, it must concatenate text box 1 and text box 2 and it must store it in this particular text box. But you can see it is not happening. When I change the data here, that event is not raised. And I am going to enter year of birth. Again, you can observe in your code, when you change something in text box 4, it has to subtract the data from 2020 and the result must be stored in text box 5. And observe here, it is not happening. But when I click this button, you can see these two events are handled. So what happens now? The button click event is a postback event because of which the server program was processed, whereas the text box change events are non-postback event because of which they were delayed until a postback event happens. Until the button click event is raised, this text box change event and this text box change event does not happen. It is not triggering, I should not say it is triggering. It is not executing the event handlers of the text box 4 text changed event or text box 2 text changed event. And you can see here I have no code in button click event. I don't have any code here in the button click event. But the button click event is the one which is raising the events called as text change event of text box 4 and text change event of text box 2. So these are not driven when you change something in text box 4 and text box 2, but these events are handled only when the button click event is happening. So it proves that The button click event will take the data immediately to the server, whereas the text box change event are not taken immediately to the server. So these two becomes the non-postback event, and this button click becomes the postback event. So that is what is specified here. In a web form, whenever you raise the event in the browser, the message will be sent to the server and the server will be responding with the handler. This process is what you call as round trip. So this example is what we have seen as a illustration of a round trip. And whenever you take a round trip, two kinds of events will be happening in a web form. One is a postback event, the other one is a non-postback event. So postback event is a term that refers when a user action occurs that requires server processing. So this event that caused the form to be posted back to the server immediately. So when you click the button, immediately the web server will be processing the request and it will be generating a new HTML, and this new HTML will be returned to the client browser. Whereas the non-postback events are the events where the form is not posted back to the server immediately, and the events that are raised at the point which may be delayed for a considerable time. And if you want to have this non-postback events to be a postback event, you can change the auto postback property. I will show you that. I go to the Visual Studio again, web form, and this is text box 2, and let us open the, let me close the application. This is text box 2, and for text box 2 you have the auto postback property. I'm going to set it to true. I set it to true and I save the application. I run the application now. I enter the first name, I enter the last name, and you can see Anita Haridas, your full name appears now. Earlier when we run the program, this text box change event was delayed until button click happens. But now when I change the data here, immediately it is posted to the server and the text box change event was executed. But here when I enter, it is not happening. I click again, only then this text box change event was raised. Okay, so that is what is specified here. We can force the controls with non-postback events to behave in a postback manner by setting their auto postback property to true. So this is what we have to understand in the non-postback. So multiple events which are non-postback will be handled in a single submission of the web form. Okay. We will also discuss what is a view state regarding the web form events in the next video. Thank you.